guys, so it's day 2 in the town of Yass and part 2 of our explorer adventures. I've got a coffee, it's very foggy here at the campground, and we're going to explore some more of the history of Hamilton Hume in the time in Yass. So as I mentioned at the end of our last episode, Yass had a colourful past. There was all sorts of different things happening in the town. There was bush rangers, there was fights over gold, there was a murder, significant, outrageous murder. 5 people were killed, and I'm going to tell you more about this later on because we were lucky enough to get a booking in the Historical Society's Yarns in the Graveyard. So we'll get to see more about that later on. Anyway, I'm going back to my coffee. And here's the introduction. It's time for another one of Kevin's big adventures. In this episode, we're going to do some exploring and have a great time with our friend Dougie Dog as Kevin sightsees around Australia. So stay tuned for this exciting episode. So guys, I know you're interested in where I'm getting some of the information about the history of the town. Well, some of it's coming from state libraries, Trove, but I also picked up this book by a Miss Mary Yeo at the Tourist Information Centre, and it's got some fantastic pieces of history in it that I've been finding very interesting. So I'm not going to share everything with you from the book, but I wanted to give you a couple of bits and pieces that I found very interesting. I mentioned in our last episode about the historical places and the historical pieces as we toured around Yass. And I did mention things like O'Connor Town and those types of things. And I'd like to show you some of the bits and pieces from this book around that topic. Interesting how a lot of these town names are still here today, including up here, guys, that's Dutton Street. So there's Dutton Street and there's Coomer Street, and this one here says Church Street by the looks of it. Anyway guys, it's getting cold out here. Okay guys, it's time to head off for our graveyard tour that's the Historical Society runs here in Yass. So we're heading from the campground up to the graveyard, and I'll be telling you a little bit about Hamilton Hume and other people he knew in Yass. So I want to give you a little bit of background about Hamilton Hume. So Hume died, and we'll visit his grave, in 1873 in Yass, and his wife Elizabeth died shortly afterwards. So he was actually born in Parramatta in 1797, so he was Australian, and he lived and grew up in the area around Appam, which is the outskirts of Sydney. He began exploring in 1814 when he was only 17 years old, during the time of Governor Macquarie. He went on to do lots of different expeditions with Charles Throsby and James Meehan. James Meehan was an ex-political Irish convict, and he arrived in Australia in 1800s, and he served as the Deputy Surveyor General under Governor Macquarie. We know that during the time that Hamilton Hume actually lived in the town of Yass, he had many different roles. He was a magistrate, and he would have operated out of the original courthouse. He was also responsible for the starting of the Yass Hospital. Now, a Dr. Woods and a Dr. Yeo came together and formed a committee that actually founded the hospital. But it was Hamilton Hume's land that the hospital was built on, and he gave £50 to the starting of it. He's listed as being one of the first trustees, but stepped down from the role shortly after being appointed to it. Thomas Laidlaw and Henry O'Brien, who I've mentioned before, were also trustees of the first Yass Hospital. So as well as being involved with the Yass Hospital, Hamilton Hume was also involved with the bringing of the Bank of New South Wales to the town of Yass. Himself, Henry O'Brien and other members of the Yass community were involved in bringing the savings bank to the town of Yass. So guys, I'm just turning the corner here and we're going to do a minor detour off. I've mentioned to you about Thomas Laidlaw, who part of the main street was named after. Well, this is Thomas Laidlaw's grave, but it's not in the cemetery with all the other graves. This is actually a separate small cemetery that was originally on his private land, and he actually made a donation to keep his grave maintained. So him and his wife were buried here. Well guys, as I said, we're heading up to the graveyard tour, but I will share some of the tidbits and snippets from the tour. I'm not going to share the whole tour with you. You'll need to come along and enjoy it with the Yass Historical Society like I booked it. They run the tours during the summer months. Please note, I'm not being sponsored by them, but I will share the link because it was a very enjoyable tour that I'm about to show you.
Married Hannah Dray in 1840, and he had a second family. And then he built Yass, and he was appointed the Pound Keeper in 1837. He had the White Hart Inn. She died at the Royal Hotel, owned by her brother-in-law, Henry Hart, and she left 6 children. The inscription there says, "Sacred to the memory of Mrs. Sarah Benjamin."
So this is Patrick Brennan and his 2 wives that were both called Catherine. Patrick was the Inspector of Police in Yass for 40 years. He was involved in numerous cases, including murder cases, and he was also shot while undertaking his duties at Lamming's flat, which is now Young, during the riots that took place on the gold fields in the 1800s.
10th of March 1868, aged 60 and 65 respectively. They were murdered by their disgruntled employee, William Mundy. He claimed that he hadn't been paid for 6 months. He used a shearing blade. Does everyone know what the old shearing clippers were like? You can read that full story on Trove. He had already been taken into custody by a Constable Hall from Bynalong. So the other 3 who were victims of Monday we got in 1843 as he introduced boiling down sheep for tallow. So nose to tail we talk about in time. Interestingly enough, Henry owned a private town. I mean, and that's what we'd all do, wouldn't we? We'd have a private town. Here in Yass called O'Connell Town. Later on that then did...
Every creditor, plus interest of £43,000.
The father, William, was born in 1805, and Elizabeth, nee Tamlin, she was born in 1810. They resided in Liskeard in Cornwall. They had the Hornet. Yass business was certainly started off in a big way with these guys. They rented a flour mill and they built a new mill on the present site where Aldi is.
So guys, here we are at Hamilton Hume's grave, the great Australian explorer, and his wife. Now, the last edition of his book, A Brief Statement of Facts, in connection with the overland expedition from the 1824, the Hume and Hovell expedition, was edited post his death and released in 1874 by the editor of the Yass Courier newspaper, J.J. Brown. J.J. Brown is also buried in the Yass cemetery, and during the tour we did get to see his grave. Okay guys, so I've headed back to the campsite now, and I'm just having a bit more of a read of Mary Yeo's book. I mentioned earlier about there was a church in Church Street, so this is a church. The interesting thing in her book, she mentions that Lord Horatio Nelson's nephew's buried in the churchyard. So when we wander up there in a little while, we'll have a look and see what is there. It looks like there's a lot of graves. Oh, goodness, we've got visitors. I don't know where these chickens have come from, but they're just come around the campsite. Okay guys, so we're going to take Dougie for another short walk and explore a bit more of the town before we head off to do some evening fishing. I'm actually looking forward to some fishing, but I wanted to tell you about the bridges in Yass Town. So the current bridge is a very modern bridge, but there's been two bridges prior to that bridge. One I'll show you shortly, and the other one was originally a wooden bridge. Now, from what I've read, it was lost in the floods in the 1870s, around the same time as the flour mill was destroyed and a lot of houses. Now, where I'm currently walking apparently used to be the old main street when Hamilton Hume lived in town. So it wasn't a walking track, it was actually the main street very close to the river. Then the second bridge, which has got the arches on it, which is still displayed here in town. Now, it was built much later, and it was built out of metal, and it stayed here until the 1970s when the new concrete bridge was built. But the first bridge, there was a lot of kerfuffle about it because Henry O'Brien had been involved in getting the money and the petitioning for the money, so there was a lot of confusion about whether or not the money was being treated correctly, because then he was busy with Parliament and those sorts of things. Anyway, we've just been arriving at the church, because I mentioned earlier from Mary Yeo's map we were going to have a look at Church Street, so I'm going to show you around the church now, providing Dougie's well behaved. So, Dougie fed the bird. This is a reaction to Dougie and the bird. Oh yes, I know! It's exciting! It is, it's birdies! So around the same time that Hamilton Hume, Henry O'Brien and many other prominent members of the Yass community were involved in getting subscriptions and fundraising to add the bell spire to this church here. The bush ranger Ben Hall was robbing the Yass mail coach as it travelled through the areas just outside of Yass. They're one of the few gravestones that are still surviving in the graveyard. Okay, so this is the grave of Eliza Campbell. Now, Eliza Campbell was actually married to Allen Campbell, who was Dr. Campbell, and many of the records he's referred to as Dr. Campbell. Now, the interesting thing, he outlived his wife by many years, and he was tragically killed in a buggy accident while visiting a patient. When he was 80 years old, he was still running his doctor's surgery. So we know Dr. Allen Campbell, who's buried here, and Hamilton Hume knew each other. They were both JPs and both worked on small magistrate matters in the town of Yass, along with a Mr. Alderman who seems to be a local solicitor. But the interesting thing that joined them together that I found was the mysterious affair of the suicidal cow, which was a small debt matter that was before Hamilton Hume and Mr. Campbell. The story was very interesting, and I will post the link below and you guys can read all about the suicidal cow. So we've headed down to a nice spot to do some fishing. You can see the river there. Dougie's having a lovely sniff. There's a little person's fishing rod in the water there. She's very excited about catching a fish. And there's a big fishing rod in the water. And you can't see any fish there. But I've got my fingers crossed we might catch something. Anyway, we're heading off soon. Oh my god, guys, did you see that? I'm not sure what that was. Anyway, stay tuned to the channel. We're going to head off shortly, so don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, because we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Oh my god, that's a water rat. So, wow. Anyway, stay tuned.